Wileman.
Sorry, Neil.
Wileman, W-I-L-E-M-A-N.
That microphone's not quite picking you up.
I call Neil Wileman.
You take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
Bible, thanks.
Bible? There's a Bible there. Would you take it in your hand, please, and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
the evidence that I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat, please. Yes, Ms. Finnis.
Thank you, Your Honour. Would you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Neil Brendan Wileman.
Mr Wileman, you made a statement the 23rd of April this year.
That's right.
You don't have a copy of it with you?
Not with me, no.
We'll give you a copy. I'll just clip it together for you so it's easier. The contents of that statement, Mr Wileman, are true and correct?
Yes.
I tender the statement.
It'll be Exhibit 2812.
I invite you, Mr Wileman, to read your statement.
Yes, okay.
And if you'd like me to take over at any stage, happy to do so.
Okay. This statement made by me accurately sets out the evidence that I am prepared to give to the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. The statement is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. My full name is Neil Brendan Wileman. I am 55 years old. I was born in North Melbourne and live with my mum, dad and two younger sisters. I started primary school when I was 4 years old. I started at Broad Meadows Primary School. About 2 years later, my parents moved to Frankston and I moved to a Catholic school nearby. About 2 years after starting at the Frankston school, my parents divorced. My father won custody of the children, so my two sisters and I resided with him in Melbourne. My mother had issues with alcohol and was living somewhere in St Kilda, Melbourne at the time. I went to St Francis Xavier's College in Ballarat for half of Year 5 and Year 6 in 1972. At the age of 11, I started at St Patrick's College, Ballarat. My father was a sales representative and was regularly travelling overseas for work. He was unable to look after us while he was away, so I was sent to full-time boarding school. My two sisters were both at Sacred Heart College. That's incorrect, Ballarat, a girls' boarding school. My father thought I would get a good education out of Ballarat Catholic School. As a boarding student at both St Francis and St Patrick's, I resided in a dormitory that was located on the school grounds. The dormitory was a big room with rows of beds where all the kids slept. For each dormitory there was a dormitory master who lived in a cubicle with no roof at the end of the dormitory. The dormitory master was responsible for the welfare of the kids, ensuring they got ready for school each day, ate their meals, did their homework, and was also responsible for discipline. When I started at St Patrick's in 1972, the dormitory master in my house was Brother Ring. During the year, either late 1972 or early 73, Brother Ring went on retreat when he was absent from the school for a while. When Brother Ring was away, Brother Dowland took over as the dormitory master. Dowland was also a teacher at the school. Initially, I enjoyed boarding school. I made some good friends and really enjoyed the sport. I was doing well academically, passing all of my subjects. There was a close bond between the boarding students because there was only about 20 boys in my dormitory. In the early part of 1973, I turned 12 years old. I remember it was a school day about 4:30 in the afternoon, just before tea. I'd walked back from class to the dormitory. There was no one else at the dormitory, and I was on my way to the toilet when Dowland signalled to me from his cubicle at the end of the dormitory and said, "Come here." I was about 10 metres away from him. I walked towards him and he said, "Come closer." I moved very close to him. Dallin then leaned over with his head close to me and smelt my breath. He said, "Have you been smoking cigarettes?" I said, "Yes, sir." Dallin then hit me across the head twice with an open hand. The force of him hitting me caused me to fall to my knees on the ground. Dallin took out his keys, unlocked the door to his cubicle and said to me, "Come in." Once inside his room, Dallin hit me a couple of more times across the head with an open hand and I fell to the floor again. He told me to stand up, then he started rubbing my penis on the outside of my clothes. Dallin then unzipped my pants, put his hand inside my zipper and touched my penis directly. I think he was trying to get me aroused by holding and rubbing my penis. I felt sick and disgusted by what Dallin was doing. I was too scared to move away from him or try to stop him, as he had already hit me several times across the head, and I did not want to get hit again. Dallin continued to sexually abuse me for several minutes. He then zipped up my pants and told me to go. He did not say anything else at the time, and I did not tell anybody, as I was scared of what would happen to me, and I was embarrassed and disgusted by what had happened. Dallin continued to sexually abuse me, and the incidents occurred either in Dallin's cubicle or in the back of the classroom when we did our evening classes at 7:30 p.m. The evening classes were held for us to do our homework. The classroom contained all the boarders from my school year. Often there would be other people nearby, and Dallin seemed a bit rushed, often just touching me on the penis. When Dallin was abusing me at the back of the classroom, it was done when the other boys would have been able to see if they turned around. They knew not to turn around, or they would have cops and physical abuse. There was one other boarding student that I knew this happened to as well. He and I discussed the sexual abuse we were suffering at the hands of Dallin. On one occasion, about the fourth time Dallin sexually abused me, we were in his cubicle in the dormitory. I think it was an afternoon after class or on a weekend. It was a couple of weeks after the first time Dallin abused me, and I was in his cubicle because Dallin suspected me of smoking again. He hit me several times across the head with an open hand and said something to me about smoking, but I can't recall what he said. Dallin then started rubbing my penis through my clothes again, proceeding to unzip my pants and put his hand inside my clothes, touching my penis. He then pulled my pants down and started sucking my penis. I did not get an erection and I felt dirty, frightened and cold. After about 10 minutes he pulled my pants up, hit me a few more times across the head and sent me away. During the abuse he did not say anything to me. Dallin sexually and physically abused me approximately 2 or 3 times a week for about 12 months. I was often at the school on weekends and during school holidays when a lot of the other boys had gone home. There were not many people around at these times and it was easy for Dallin to find opportunities to abuse me. The abuse consisted of Dallin touching me or sucking my penis. He did not expose himself to me and did not ask me to touch him. When Dallin first began abusing me, I put up with it because the sexual abuse usually meant less physical abuse. Dallin was regularly hitting me with his favourite method, being to hit me across the head with an open hand. The sexual abuse seemed like a better option at the time. But once Dallin began performing oral sex on me, I couldn't take it anymore. About September or October 1973, I ran away from school. I went to my dad's place in North Melbourne and told him the brothers at the school were hurting me. I didn't tell him I was being sexually abused because I was ashamed and embarrassed about it. I was also really confused at this time because I'd always believed that sex only took place between a man and a woman. Dad told me that he had spoken to the headmaster at St Patrick's, Brother Nangle. Dad said if they do it again, report it to Brother Nangle. The next day, Dad took me back to St Pat's. When I got back to St Pat's, Dallin continued to sexually abuse me. I approached Brother Nangle, like my father told me, and told him that Dallin was hurting me. I was not able to tell him about the sexual abuse at the time. Nangle said that he would talk to Dallin. A short time later, Dallin approached me at school and called me a dobber. I was punished for complaining, but it did not stop the abuse. In fact, it made Dallin more aggressive. I didn't complain to anyone at school again. When I spoke to Nangle, he didn't seem shocked at all. He was very businesslike about it. Whilst I didn't tell him about the sexual abuse, he asked no questions to find out exactly what was going on. He had been more sympathetic. Had he been more sympathetic and nurturing, I may have opened up to him about the abuse. The sexual abuse by Dowling continued until I left the school. In 1973, when I was in Form 2, Brother Ring returned to the school after several months away on retreat. When he returned, he did not go back to being the dormitory master, but was a maths and science teacher and music teacher. Very soon after returning to the school, Ring began to sexually abusing me. After school, the boys had to shower in the dormitory. Ring would come and stand around the shower and locker room watching the boys shower. After my shower, Ring would come up to me and fondle my genitals in the locker room. There were often other boys around the area, but not in the immediate vicinity. Ring also abused me in the music room. After dinner, students were able to ask permission to go to the music room to practice. This was a chance to go and practice music on my own. Sometimes Ring would come to the music room when I was there and abuse me in the music room. Ring sexually abused me about a dozen times in total. He continued to abuse me until I ran away from the school for good. I don't understand why this has been blacked out.
You can just read around the black bar.
Yeah, but I still don't understand why his name has been left out.
The Royal Commission is required to do its work in such a way that doesn't impede or prejudice current or future ongoing criminal proceedings and civil proceedings. So any name that's been redacted has been redacted in order to satisfy that. Do you understand?
No, I don't. This man's passed away, so it's obviously no upcoming criminal proceedings outstanding.
I suspect that we have found that he's not passed away, Mr. Wileman.
Okay.
Do we know?
Well, yes, we know he's not passed away.
Very well. If
Okay.
we know,
I thought he passed
no, that's
away.
right. If we know that,
Just wishful thinking.
if we know that, well, that's
Okay. Brother.
That's the reason, you understand.
Right, okay. Brother was also a teacher at St Patrick's. I can't recall exactly what he taught. He was very physically abusive. He would regularly hit students across the head with an open hand for minor misdemeanours. Brother also sexually abused me during the same period as both Dowling and Ring were abusing me. He assaulted me about 3 or 4 times whilst I was at St Patrick's. He would somehow get me alone in a classroom and would touch me on the outside of my clothes. I continued to run away from school. On one occasion in 1973, I went to Dad's place and told him the brothers were still hurting me. I still did not tell him about the sexual abuse because of my shame and embarrassment. Dad was not travelling as much at this time. Dad allowed me to stay with him and I started attending St Mary's School in North Melbourne. I stayed with Dad for the rest of 1973 and for a few months at the start of 1974. During this time I got myself into some trouble with the police and I ended up before the Children's Court. After the court matter was finished, I was sent back to St Pat's as a boarding student again. I was told that I would be made a ward of the state if I did not return to boarding school. When I went back to St Patrick's, I continued to be sexually abused by Dowling, Ring, and once I turned 13 years old, I was able to stand up for myself a bit more. I became more defiant. I wasn't as scared of them as I was when I was 12. I ran away again, and this time the school expelled me and I was not allowed to return. By this time, Dad had remarried and was living in Albert Park. I went to live with him and I attended Albert Park High School. I left school when I was 15 years old. I never told Nangle about the sexual abuse by Ring because when I told him about Dowling, nothing improved. In fact, Dowling had become worse. I did not want to suffer any more than I currently was, so I kept quiet. The first people I told about my sexual abuse was the mates from school. They had not been abused themselves. They were very supportive. I was about 20 years old at the time. I was closer to my mum than my dad, and also around the age of 20 I told her about the abuse I had suffered. She was very angry about what had happened to me. She was also supportive. I first mentioned the sexual abuse I had suffered to my father when I was 20 years old. I told him what had been done to me and how upset I was by it. Dad believed me when I told him, but his response was essentially, there is not much you can do about it now, except try to move on. I was working as a laboratory technician, and one day during a break at work, I opened up the Herald Sun newspaper. There was a report in relation to sexual abuse at St Olympia's School in Ballarat. On page 2 of the paper, there was a silhouette picture of Dowland. I recognised him straight away from the shape of his head. According to the news report, Dowland moved from St Olympia's School to St Pat's School. Dowland had been charged with child sex offences. Seeing this news report inspired me to report the abuse I had suffered to the police. On the 30th of October 1996, I attended Newport Police Station and reported the abuse I had suffered. I provided a signed statement to the police. At the time that I reported to the police, I believed that Dowland would be charged with offences perpetrated against me. Dowland was not charged in relation to offences against me, but I don't know why. I thought what happened to me would be dealt with concurrently with other charges. I had also reported to the abuse by ring and to the police, but the police told me that they had both died. So there was no way to proceed with charges. They were able to get away with abusing kids without any punishment at all. About 2 years ago in 2013, I was approached by a police officer from Task Force Sano. He told me the police were revisiting Dowland and were looking at charging him with the offences he committed against me. He asked me, would you be on board or not? I replied yes. The matter proceeded for both my charges and charges relating to 19 other boys who had been abused by Dowland. Dowland pleaded guilty to a number of charges. I provided a victim impact statement but did not read the statement to the court. Dowland was convicted and sentenced to a total of 6 years in prison with a non-parole period of 3 years. I believe the DPP are currently appealing the sentence. I was very disappointed with the sentence. I would expect this sort of sentence for someone who committed burglaries, not someone who had abused 20 boys over an extended period of time and ruined so many lives. About 2001, a friend in Broken Rights told me about civil litigation. I had 5 years to make a claim from when I reported it to police in 1996. I had a family court matter at the time when I was fighting to get access to my own kids. My ex-wife's lawyer said I was using child abuse as an excuse for drinking and I wasn't fit to have access to my 2 sons. This was the catalyst for me to seek compensation so I could prove I was not lying about the abuse. I got on a train to Frankston the next day. I approached the solicitor David Forster, who had been recommended by Broken Rights. Shortly after meeting with Forster, I attended a mediation session. I think the mediation was in 2002. I remember that a senior member of the Christian Brothers was at the mediation, but can't recall his name. I sat in a room with Forster while a mediator went between me and the Christian Brothers with offers. An offer was made for $75,000. Forster thought this was about as much as I could get, so he advised that I should take it. I agreed to settle for that amount. It wasn't about the money, it was about credibility. Out of the $75,000, I had to pay $25,000 to solicitors for costs. I think the church should have agreed to pay my costs. The senior member of the Christian Brothers apologised to me for what had happened and invited me back to the church. I refused, but felt somewhat vindicated. I didn't feel that the apology that was offered was sincere, and it didn't mean anything to me. I have a juvenile criminal record. I was angry at what had happened to me as a child, and I thought to myself, well, if you can break the law, I can also break the law. Mostly my behaviour involved theft and property damage. I spent time in a number of juvenile detention centres. I moved out of home at a relatively young age and have always struggled to get work. I do have a Certificate 3 in fitness. I'm a qualified personal trainer. I also have a Diploma of Applied Science in Chemistry from the University of Victoria. While I have these qualifications, I feel that the abuse has stopped me from realising my potential and making the most of my skills. I've always suffered from low self-esteem, which does not go away. I suffer from depression, have been on antidepressant, antipsychotic and sleeping medication. I have abused alcohol and made several suicide attempts. I'm currently taking antipsychotic medication. The abuse has greatly disrupted my family life. All of my relationships with family have been ruined. I've had difficulty forming relationships. Both of my sisters have passed away. My mum passed away a couple of years ago. We had a good relationship and I looked after her before she died. My father is currently living in Thailand. My ex-wife has been successful in preventing me having a relationship with my sons. They are currently 29 and 22 years old. I do not see them. Approximately 3 or 4 of my close friends have committed suicide. One of my school friends who committed suicide when I was about 18 particularly upset me. This friend found out about the rape of his brother and went and physically assaulted Dowling. He then drove him to the bush and hooked a hose up to his car. What a waste of life. He committed suicide when I was about 18. I didn't even learn about it until later. He wasn't even abused himself. His little brother was raped by Dowling and he just couldn't deal with it. It makes me furious. It was a death. He didn't even. I would like to see a on the needs of victims they need. There's a huge suicide rate in victims at Ballarat, and part of the problem is that victims just don't feel like they can trust anyone. I tried, but I was either not believed or didn't care. Those responsible for covering up the abuse are almost as much to blame for what has happened as those who committed the abuse. Emphasis on protecting the reputation of institutions like the Catholic Church and not enough emphasis on protecting children.
Wileman, I understand that you wish to make a few more.
Just want to say something here. There's something that happened since I gave this evidence. I would like to, in addition to my statement that has happened to me, since providing my statement to the Royal Commission. My sister recently told me that she doesn't want me to be around my 5-year-old nephew. She told me that this was because I recently read an article that said that those that had been sexually in the past would go on to be abusers themselves. As a result, I am not allowed to have any contact with my nephew, and I no longer have any contact with my sister. I do not know what article it is that she read, but I believe it's a commonly held opinion. You just have to go onto the internet. This offended and hurt me significantly. As a victim of sexual abuse, I'm even more sensitive to protecting children. I want the Royal Commission to find that this thinking of the abused becoming abuser is totally wrong. As survivors, we have enough to deal with without this further victimisation.
Thank you, Mr. Wileman.
Does anyone, just a second, Mr. Wileman, does anyone have any questions of Mr. Wileman? No. Now, Mr. Wileman, you may leave the witness box. And thank you. You are excused.